The morning the most arrogant man in my courtroom met the one person who could break him. In 40 years on this bench in Charlotte, North Carolina, I have encountered arrogance in many forms. I have seen arrogance that was really insecurity, arrogance that was fear dressed up in expensive clothing, arrogance that melted the moment someone looked at it directly and refused to look away. But I want to tell you about the Wednesday morning that a 26-year-old man named Brandon Calloway walked into my courtroom, looked around at every person in it, and made clear, without saying a single word, that he considered none of us worth his time. And I want to tell you about the 73-year-old woman who, without raising her voice, without anger, without anything but quiet truth, took that arrogance completely apart. If you believe that pride has a way of meeting exactly what it needs to meet, subscribe right now. Because what happened in my courtroom that Wednesday changed more than one life. It was a Wednesday in April, the kind of southern spring morning that makes you remember why you live where you live. Warm, soft, the dogwoods just finishing their bloom. The courthouse on East Trade Street gets good light in the mornings, and that light was coming through the tall windows in long gold bars when my clerk, a man named Wendell, who has worked beside me for 17 years, handed me the morning docket. He handed it to me and said nothing. He walked back to his desk and straightened papers that were already straight. In 17 years, Wendell communicates everything in what he does not say. That morning, what he did not say was considerable. I looked at the file. Respondent, Brandon Calloway, 26. Charges, 11 parking violations over 4 months, including 4 in handicapped-accessible zones, 2 blocking fire hydrants, 1 blocking a bus stop, 4 expired meters with failure to appear on original dates. Total accumulated, $2,180. 11 violations. Failure to appear. I noted it all. I walked to the bench. Wendell called his name. Brandon Calloway came through the door of my courtroom the way certain people come through doors, like the room should adjust to them rather than the other way around. He was 26, tall, well-built. He wore clothes that were expensive in that particular way that wants you to notice. A jacket with a visible logo. Shoes that probably cost more than my first car. A watch that caught the courtroom light and threw it back at you. His hair was cut precisely. His posture was the posture of someone who had been told their whole life that they were exceptional and had decided to take that information seriously. He sat down at the respondent's table and leaned back in the chair. He did not put his phone away. He looked at it as he sat down. He looked at it as Wendell read the charges. He looked at it, and this is the part that told me everything I needed to know about what we were dealing with. He looked at it while I was speaking to him. I said, "Good morning, Mr. Calloway." He looked up from the phone with the mild, tolerant expression of someone pausing a more interesting activity. He said, "Morning." I said, "You have 11 violations here over 4 months, and you missed your original court date. I'd like to understand what's been going on. Can you put the phone face down on the table while we talk?" He looked at the phone. He looked at me. He said it face up. I said, "Face down, Mr. Calloway." He flipped it, slowly. I said, "Thank you. Now, 4 of these violations are for parking in handicapped-accessible zones. Can you help me understand that?" He shrugged one shoulder, the shrug of someone for whom the question barely qualifies as a question. He said, "I park where I need to park. I'm in and out fast. I'm not taking anyone's spot for long." I said, "Those spots are reserved by law for people who require accessible parking. Time is not the variable that determines whether the law applies." He said, "With respect, Your Honor, I was parked in those spots for maybe 10 minutes each time. Anyone who needed it could have waited." The courtroom was very quiet. I have been on this bench for 40 years. Very few things surprise me anymore. But the particular confidence required to say that in a courtroom, to suggest that a person with a disability should simply wait while you finished your errand, That landed on me in a way I did not fully expect. I kept my voice level. I said, "Mr. Calloway, what do you do for work?" He sat up slightly. This question apparently was one he was willing to engage with. He said, "I run a company, digital marketing. We work with major brands." "Your own company?" "Yes, started it 3 years ago." "And you built it yourself?" Something flickered. "My family helped with initial capital, but I run it." I nodded slowly. "And you're proud of that?" He looked at me as if checking whether the question was a trap. "Yes, you should be," I said. "Building something is real. I mean that." He did not know what to do with sincerity from the bench. I watched him recalibrate. "But I want to ask you something," I continued. "The people in this courtroom today, your co-respondents, the people waiting for their cases, you walked past them coming in. Did you look at any of them?" A pause. "Not particularly." "There is a woman in the back row," I said. "Her name is Frances Okafor. She is 73 years old. She has been waiting since 8 this morning for her case to be called. She uses a wheelchair. She drove herself here." I paused. I would like to ask her to come forward, with the court's time, to say something, if you will allow it. He stared at me. "I have to allow it?" "No," I said. "I do. But I am extending you the courtesy of asking, because I want you to understand that what she is about to say is directly relevant to why you are in this room." He looked at his face-down phone. He looked at me. He said, "Fine." Wendell went to the back of the courtroom. A moment later, he wheeled Frances Okafor forward. She was 73, as I said, small, compact in her chair, wearing a church dress in dark purple and a pair of white gloves she had not taken off. Her hair was silver and neatly done. Her eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses, were clear and direct. She carried herself with the particular dignity of a person who has spent decades not allowing the world's indifference to diminish her. She positioned herself in the open space between the gallery and the bench, facing Brandon Calloway directly. I said, "Mrs. Okafor, thank you for your patience this morning, and thank you for agreeing to speak. Will you tell the court what happened on February 9th? She looked at me. Then she turned and looked at Brandon Calloway. She had the kind of look that does not require volume. She said in a voice that was quiet and completely clear, "On February 9th, I had a cardiology appointment at the medical complex on Tryon Street. I have a heart valve condition. I have had it for 9 years. I manage it with medication and quarterly appointments." She folded her gloved hands in her lap. "I arrived at 10:15 for a 10:30 appointment. The accessible parking area near the building entrance had 3 designated spaces. All 3 were occupied." She paused. 2 of those vehicles had placards. 1 did not. I watched Brandon Calloway's face. He had been sitting with the practiced neutrality of someone waiting for something to become relevant to him. It was becoming relevant. Mrs. Okafor continued, "I am not able to walk long distances without stopping. My heart does not tolerate the exertion. The next available parking was at the far end of the lot, which is approximately the length of a football field from the entrance." She said it without drama. "The way you state a fact you have learned to live around." "I parked at the far end," she said. "I began walking. About halfway across the lot, I experienced chest pain, significant chest pain. I sat down on a concrete divider between parking rows and waited for it to pass." She looked at her hands. "A woman I had never met stopped her car and stayed with me until I felt I could continue. It took 11 minutes. The courtroom was absolutely still. I made my appointment," Mrs. Okafor said. "My cardiologist found that my heart rate had been elevated, likely from the exertion and the episode in the parking lot. She adjusted my medication and told me to be more careful." A pause. "I am 73 years old. I have had a heart condition for 9 years. I have been careful my entire life." She looked at Brandon Calloway. She said, simply, "Those spaces are not conveniences. They are the difference between whether people like me can participate in the world or cannot. When someone uses them without need, they are not just breaking a rule. They are telling us that our ability to get where we need to go is less important than their preference for a closer parking spot. She was not angry. Her voice carried no heat at all. That made it more powerful, not less. She said, "I am not here for an apology. I am here because this young man needs to understand what his choices cost, not in dollars, in what they cost other people." She looked at me. She nodded once. She folded her hands again and waited. I looked at Brandon Calloway. He was not leaning back anymore. He was sitting forward, both forearms on the table, looking at Frances Okafor with an expression that I watched change while I watched it. The easy blankness had gone. Something underneath it was showing through. He was looking at a 73-year-old woman who had sat on a concrete parking divider for 11 minutes, waiting for chest pain to pass so she could keep her cardiology appointment, because his car was in her spot. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, "Which day was it?" Mrs. Okafor looked at him. He said, "You said February 9th. What time was your appointment?" 10:30, she said. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed in his face, permanently. The way a face changes when a person receives information they cannot unfold. He said, "I was at the coffee shop in that complex. I was there for about 15 minutes. I parked close because it was cold." He stopped. He looked at his hands on the table. "That was a cold morning." Mrs. Okafor said quietly, "Yes, it was." He pressed his lips together. I let the room hold that for a moment. Then I spoke. I said, "Mr. Calloway, I want to ask you a question, and I want you to think about it before you answer." He looked at me. "You told me that anyone who needed that spot could have waited because you were only there 10 minutes. You believed that. You believed it when you said it. I could hear that you believed it." I paused. "Do you still believe it?" He was quiet. "No," he said. It came out rough, like it cost him something. I nodded. I said, "Here is what I see in front of me. I see a young man who built a company from the ground up, which tells me he is capable of real effort when he understands why something matters. I see someone who, until about 4 minutes ago, had never been asked to sit with the consequences of his convenience, not because he is evil, but because no one made it real for him." I paused. Mrs. Okafor just made it real. Brandon Calloway looked at the woman in the wheelchair. He said, "I'm sorry. I know that's not enough, but I am." Mrs. Okafor looked at him for a long moment. She said, "I know you are. I can see it." She tilted her head slightly. "The question is what you do with that." I made my ruling. I said, "Mr. Calloway, I am not going to pretend the law did not apply to you for the last 4 months. It did. It applies equally to everyone in this room, regardless of what they drive or what they earn." He nodded. "The total assessed is $2,180. I am reducing that to $500 paid to the Disability Rights Carolina organization here in Charlotte. The remaining amount is suspended pending completion of what I am going to require." I looked at him directly. "You will complete 80 hours of community service. Specifically, you will volunteer with the Disability Rights Office and with the CATS Transit Accessibility Program, which helps ensure that people with disabilities can access public transportation in this city. You will attend 2 community listening sessions where people with disabilities speak about the daily barriers they face. You will do this not to check a box. You will do this to understand." He said, "Yes, Your Honor. And one more thing." I paused. "You are going to use your company's digital marketing expertise, the thing you actually built, to create a public awareness campaign about accessible parking. Real content, distributed to real audiences. Something that reaches people like who you were 3 hours ago, before you walked into this room." He stared at me. I said, "You have skills. Use them for something that matters. That is not a punishment. That is an opportunity." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, Your Honor, I can do that." I said, "I know you can." I looked at Mrs. Okafor. "Mrs. Okafor, thank you for your patience, for your honesty, and for the grace with which you said what needed to be said." She inclined her head with the dignity of a woman who has been conducting herself with grace for 73 years and intends to continue. As Brandon Calloway gathered himself to leave, he stopped beside Mrs. Okafor's wheelchair. He crouched down, put himself at eye level, the way Judge Jade had taught me to do once, when she said, "If you want a real conversation, you have to be willing to come down." He said, "I'd like to ask you something, if that's all right." She looked at him. "Would you be willing to talk to me? Not today, whenever you want. I'd like to understand more about what you navigate every day, for the campaign, but also just because I think I should know." She studied him the way an experienced person studies a young one, taking his measure. She said, "Give me your card." He reached into his jacket. He held it out. She took it. She looked at it. She tucked it into her bag. She said, "I'll be in touch." He stood. He gave a small, real nod. Not the nod of someone performing, the nod of someone who has been humbled and is trying to figure out what comes next. He walked out of my courtroom. 8 weeks later, Wendell showed me something on his phone, a video posted on a digital marketing channel with a significant following. Clean, professional, visually sharp. The kind of content someone who knows what they are doing puts together. It opened with a simple question in white text on a black screen. "Do you know what it costs someone else when you take their spot?" What followed was a series of short interviews. Real people, real names, with permission. People with mobility conditions, visual impairments, chronic pain. Talking simply and directly about what accessible parking means to their daily lives. What it means when it is taken. What it costs them in effort, in health, in dignity. The production was excellent. Clear, unhurried, emotionally precise. At the end, a simple message. Accessible parking is not a convenience. It is how people participate in the world. Leave it for those who need it. No company logo, no self-promotion, just the message. It had been viewed at the time Wendell showed me 400,000 times. Wendell said his analytics team sent a note to the courthouse. They said it's been shared by disability advocacy organizations in 14 states. I looked at the video for a moment. I said, "What did you say back?" Wendell said, "I told them the judge would be glad to hear it." I said, "That's exactly right." I received a note from Frances Okafor 6 weeks after the hearing, written by hand, as she had likely written letters her whole life. Careful, considered, the handwriting of a woman who takes words seriously. She wrote that she and Brandon Calloway had met for coffee twice, that he had asked good questions and listened to the answers rather than preparing his next question while she was still speaking. She wrote that she had told him about her career, 31 years as a school principal in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system, about her late husband, about the 9 years since her diagnosis. She wrote, "He reminded me of some of my students, the ones who were difficult because they had never been given a reason to be otherwise. Once you find the reason, they surprise you. He surprised me." She ended with, "You gave him a reason, Judge. That is the work." I read that note twice. Then I put it where I keep the things that last. I want to tell you what that Wednesday taught me, or reminded me, because I think most of the important things in this life are reminders rather than discoveries. It reminded me that arrogance at its core is almost always a failure of imagination. Brandon Calloway was not cruel. He was not malicious. He simply had not been required, not once, in 26 years, to imagine what the world looks like from a place other than his own. That is not entirely his fault. It is also not entirely excusable, but it is correctable. And it is correctable most powerfully, not through punishment, but through encounter, through a 73-year-old woman in white gloves who does not raise her voice and does not need to. What Frances Okafor did that morning took real courage. It is not easy to sit in front of a stranger who has hurt you without anger, without accusation, and simply tell the truth about what their choices cost. to trust that the truth is enough, to not need them to be villainous for your experience to be valid. That is strength, genuine, hard-won strength. My father used to say that the most powerful thing you can do in a conflict is refuse to perform it, refuse to shout, refuse to harden. Just tell the truth clearly and let the other person decide what to do with it. Frances Okafor did exactly that. And Brandon Calloway, to his credit, decided to do something with it. That is what this bench is for. Not to crush people, not to make examples, to create the conditions under which an encounter like that one is possible. To put two people in the same room and trust that truth, spoken plainly, can do what no fine alone ever could. If this story has reached something in you, I want to hear from you. Leave me a comment. Tell me about a time someone showed you, without anger, without lecture, what your choices actually cost. Or tell me about a time you had the courage to say it to someone else. Those moments are the ones that change things. They are worth naming. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it is not too late to become someone different, share this with them today. God bless you, Frances. God bless Brandon, who surprised a 73-year-old school principal. God bless all of you watching this, wherever you are. I'll see you next week.